Hi guys, welcome back to another episode. This episode will talk about race and how it affects society. And for this one, I'm just gonna talk about my opinion and just yap and yap and yap. But first, I just want to say Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, bestowed us with the principles of our government, which states, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." But the men he refers to for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is only limited to like the white privileged class and not, African Americans, Asian Americans, minorities, any of that falls into that category. But we learned that through the reading that a lot of laws have been put in place to limit the ability for minorities to advance in society. And for starters, there's redlining, Jim Crow laws, and so much more that occurred for African Americans, especially. And I know that when I was studying about like redlining and racial covenants, that they're not just limited to African Americans, but also like Hispanics and Asian Americans. And those racial deeds are also like ingrained into our current, like, what's the thing called? Like, or just like deeds, current deeds in our homes. And I think that's really hurtful because the idea of purchasing a home is like the American dream. And when immigrants like migrate from all over the world, they want to have the opportunity to be able to live the American dream. Like that's why they moved out of their home country. They left their parents, their family members, and their whole childhood just to have the chance to have a better future for their kids, for example. And when there's so much racism within our society that makes it difficult for other people, especially minorities, to achieve those goals, it's really hurtful and heartbreaking to hear. And when we were doing the mini assignment, the videos basically showcase that when there were like maps created by the government, and within those maps it highlighted like red zones, green zones for where the FHA, I think, could give out loans for homes. And if you were like in a hazardous zone, the FHA would not provide a loan for you, or if they did, they would provide it at like a much higher cost, or like um just a lot more, rather than if you were in a green zone, which were most likely, people of privilege with like a lot of education and generational wealth, then they could easily get a mortgage, down payment, whatever. But especially living in those like hazardous zones, you not only could not get a mortgage or loan, you also had to like succumb to a lot of terrible living conditions. So I think the video highlighted that a lot of people, since the rent was so expensive, they had to live together, and that caused overcrowding. And I personally feel like in a society where we like advocate for democracy and equal opportunity, this completely contradicts that narrative. And it's difficult because we bestow and like are always known as like the international good guys to like all the other countries, but in reality everything we do within our society is just so harmful to the people within the society, and not like everything we do is like only benefiting like the US in that sense. And the like highway construction, for example, it was to benefit the people who were able to use the highways, so the wealthy, the privileged, and it harmed the people less fortunate because like obviously when you're like creating a highway, there's a lot of construction going on, and that just like goes into school. And also like when you construct a highway, there's a lot of like materials that you have to use, and that just means that like once again terrible living conditions because like coal, all of that. And like the hospitals were even like different, I guess, for people with less means, I guess. And I feel like especially for healthcare, it's difficult knowing that not all people have the ability to have like even access healthcare, which is such, it's not like at this point it's a privilege rather than like anything, because obviously not everyone has access to such resources. And especially when it is like life or death, it's really difficult to hear that like, oh, you don't have enough money to continue to live. That's basically what I'm getting at. Like, what? But also, it's like, especially for healthcare, it's like it costs like an arm and a leg to even like afford healthcare, which is so disheartening in the society. But there are people who are trying to mitigate the disparities. But not enough, because the foundation of our government is built off so much racism. And I think it's really apparent because when we did the SHADE mini assignment, the tree equity score, we saw that like, or for me, since I knew some of the information about like racial covenants and stuff, it was apparent that the areas, because I live in San Francisco, the areas in San Francisco that have less trees or a lower tree equity score are the same areas that were considered hazardous back then, which is like, we want to progress as a society, but like how can we progress if there's so much like racism with ingrained into like our constitution, into our laws? And it's just so just like, it's very apparent that as we continue to like live, even like opportunities aren't even given. Because when I was researching about this topic, I found that like women who were like of a minority and, you know, are also women, because apparently being a woman is not good, they received less pay. And it's just the fact that like there's like a question that some people ask, like, oh, if you had a candidate, let's say he was male, but he didn't have as like good of a resume compared to a woman who has a better resume, who would you pick? And it's, oh, I kind of am getting into the gender thing, but especially for race, it's like if someone has the same achievements and the same abilities, or even better, why wouldn't you pick them? Why would you pick someone who's white and privileged compared to someone who may be a woman, or someone who may be Hispanic, or maybe African American? It's just, it kind of just blows me away. It's out of this world. But what else? Oh, I also wanted to touch about the term model minority, because that was covered in the reading. And as an like Asian American woman, or just Asian American, you would assume that like model minority is like considered good, I guess. But when I was like reading the textbook and like also like going on TikTok, I saw a video pop up that said like Asian Americans are now like not really considered, or like valued less, if you know what I mean, in college application, because of model minority and how much like of their achievement and success have like occurred because of that. But we actually have to get to like the root of this because, like, especially for like myself, a Chinese American, there was like the Chinese Exclusion Act and like so much other forms of racism that hindered our ability to succeed. And when we do succeed, it's just that like people of privilege at the time like do everything they can to not let others succeed and not take over their position of power, which is just what society is about. It's all about power, who has money, who has a voice, who has a say. And it's just that if we don't change as a society, if we don't do something for the better, if we don't try to combat these racial deeds and racial inequalities, then we cannot progress as a society. We cannot do anything for the better. And we must like make a change because especially if it's put in our constitution and we're like contradicting it, we're juxtaposing it. It's just like, what? But especially like touch back on like a little bit of culture. Um, for my culture or like my family, Asian Americans, not Asian Americans, African Americans are viewed as less than and not of equal like standards just because they are African American. And I don't believe that, but I think because of my parents like values and like what their parents taught them, I find it hard to like even bring up the topic. And like I don't want to give them like like a pass, but it's really hard because they've been like accustomed to this like sort of racism, and it's difficult to put in like a whole new narrative in their head, and they are pretty stubborn. But I think we are the future. If enough people of, I guess, my generation were to understand the racial inequalities within our society, then maybe we can have a change. Maybe all men can be equal. But yeah, thank you for listening.